In 1991, two mountaineers hiking at an altitude of about 3,000 meters noticed an interesting dark spot on the ground. As they got closer, they realized this dark spot resembled a human body. When they removed the layer covering it, they were sure it was a human body. They found this person lying in the ice, a sad sight, of course. But they also knew that encountering the bodies of mountaineers who had died at such high altitudes wasn't a rare occurrence. Unfortunately, many climbers lose their lives during risky ascents and are often left where they died, especially due to the harsh conditions. It's even known that hundreds of bodies are found in these ice layers on Everest, and some are even used as markers by climbers. So yes, it wasn't a very rare sight. That's why these mountaineers thought the body they found had a similar story, or perhaps it was a soldier lost in the world wars. It was a common scene. However, as they began to examine the body more closely and even extract it from the layer it was embedded in, they immediately noticed something peculiar. They promptly called for help to record this oddity and started excavating with a camera present. The images you're seeing now are the actual footage of this excavation. As the mountaineers unearthed the body, objects found with it also began to appear. For instance, there was a stone knife, shoes made from twigs, arrows, clothes made from animal hide, and a copper axe. This certainly didn't resemble a mountaineer or a soldier. The mountaineers' discovery suddenly turned into an archaeological excavation. It was as if they were unearthing history, like a journey through time. A copper axe, a stone knife. From what era did this person come? Who was he? What was he doing there? And what happened to him? Why did he die? The two mountaineers had no idea they had found perhaps the most studied, most recognized, best preserved, and oldest body in human history. We'll be discussing the tragic story of this man, known as Ötzi the Iceman, because he was found in the Ötztal Alps, and who, to our recent surprise, turned out to be from our own lands. Let's begin. After the mountaineers removed Ötzi's remains, scientists naturally took this almost perfectly preserved body to their laboratories. As they began to examine it, their astonishment grew. Carbon dating tests showed that this body was exactly 5,300 years old. Moreover, it wasn't just a skeleton. It was preserved with almost all of its tissues. For the scientific world, this was an incredible treasure. So much so that many researchers today say Ötzi is the most studied human in history. Ötzi was a man around 45 years old, 1.60 meters tall, and weighing about 50 kilograms. He had brown eyes and dark hair. But even learning this much was a great achievement for scientists, because it had never been possible to know the physical characteristics of such an ancient human so clearly before. So, how was he so well preserved? The secret was in the location where his body was found. Ötzi was found in a hollow between two large rocks. This hollow eventually filled with snow and was covered by an ice layer approximately 3 meters thick. This sheltered spot, protected from glacial currents, allowed Ötzi's body to remain intact for thousands of years. So, Ötzi is actually a natural mummy. Unlike artificial mummies, he was preserved by natural conditions, not by human hands. That's why Ötzi is different from Egyptian mummies. He still has some water in his tissues. This makes him even more difficult to preserve. But it also makes him an invaluable resource for scientists. However, the biggest surprise in Ötzi's story came with the revelation of his cause of death. At first, everyone thought he had frozen to death in a snowstorm until a radiologist made a shocking discovery while examining his X-rays in 2001. There was an arrowhead embedded in Ötzi's left shoulder. CT scans performed after this discovery further clarified the situation. The arrow had severed one of Ötzi's main arteries in his left arm. Scientists estimate that Ötzi could have lived for at most 15 to 20 minutes after this injury. So, we were no longer just facing a historical discovery, but also a 5,300-year-old murder case. So, who was Ötzi? What did he do? Why was he killed? Scientists pursued these questions. CT scans detected some deterioration in Ötzi's body and joint structure. However, there was very little wear and tear on his upper body. This indicated that he was not a farmer, because someone engaged in agriculture at that time would be expected to have severe wear and tear on their arms and shoulders. However, Ötzi had severe damage to his leg and back muscles. Cartilage loss was detected in his knees and hips. This suggested that he was someone who constantly walked and roamed mountainous terrains. Scientists also took samples from Ötzi's stomach, performing what was almost an autopsy. They wanted to determine his last meal, and what they found was quite interesting. Ibex meat and a valuable type of wheat called einkorn. So Ötzi was actually eating quite well. This was a confusing situation as there were both hunting and agricultural foods in his diet. Furthermore, pollens found in his stomach indicated that Ötzi had been constantly moving up and down in the mountains during the 48 hours before his death. The items he carried with him were at least as fascinating as he was: a fur cap, patched leather pants, deer hide shoes stuffed with straw. He also had weapons: a 1.8 meter long bow and a quiver containing dozens of arrows. He had specifically chosen dogwood for his arrows because the branches of this tree grow straight and provide ideal material for making arrows. But perhaps his most valuable possession was his copper axe. This is one of the oldest metal tools found in Europe, indicating that Ötzi was not a simple hunter, but part of a more developed society. Perhaps one of the most interesting discoveries was Ötzi's tattoos. He had exactly 61 tattoos on his body. The discovery of these tattoos alone was a technological marvel, because seeing tattoos on a 5,300-year-old mummy isn't that easy. Scientists used a special camera for this, a camera sensitive to invisible light. This allowed a complete map of the tattoos to be made. The tattoos generally consisted of parallel lines and cross marks. The interesting thing was that most of these tattoos were found in areas where he experienced joint pain. For example, in the area of his back pain, behind his rheumatic knee, on his ankles. Even a recently discovered new group of tattoos was found near the region where he experienced gallbladder and intestinal problems. Archaeologists conducted experiments to understand how these tattoos were made. They used a sharp bone needle to pierce the skin and inject a charcoal-based ink. Experiments on pigskin showed that hundreds of needle pricks were needed for a single line. Considering the 61 tattoos on Ötzi's body, you can imagine how much pain he must have endured. So why did he endure so much pain? Scientists believe it might have been a form of acupuncture. In different parts of the world, from India to Southeast Asia, from North America to Arctic regions, Many cultures have a tradition of therapeutic tattooing. Ötzi is the oldest known evidence of this tradition. But that's not all. These tattoos weren't Ötzi's only method of treatment. He carried two different types of mushrooms with him. One was the tinder fungus. He used this mushroom to make fire because when dried, it ignites very easily and can burn for a very long time. The other was the birch polypore. He carried it tied with a string. This mushroom has antibacterial and antiviral properties. When placed on wounds, it prevents infection and can even be used as a painkiller. It's thought that Ötzi carried these mushrooms intentionally because they had exactly the properties he needed. It was amazing that people 5,300 years ago had such advanced medical knowledge. Now, let's go back to our murder investigation. Who killed Ötzi and why? As we mentioned, Ötzi was hit by an arrow, that was certain. But why? Researchers are focusing on one scenario. Perhaps Ötzi was on a trade journey, or maybe he was fleeing from someone. The fact that the arrow came from behind suggests that the attacker caught him off guard. Perhaps he was ambushed. The details of his death are also interesting. After the arrow struck him, Ötzi probably fell into that rocky hollow or dragged himself there. His prone position and deformed nose indicate that he died with his face against a rock. So he most likely died very quickly from blood loss. The interesting thing is that the attacker did not take Ötzi's valuable possessions. The copper axe, bow and arrows, valuable clothes, all were left there. These were very valuable items at that time. This might suggest that the murder was not for robbery. Was it a personal vendetta or a tribal conflict? Another detail is the cuts found on Ötzi's hands. These cuts could be wounds he sustained while defending himself in a fight. So perhaps he was involved in another conflict shortly before his death. The location where his body was found is also an important detail. It's a pass in the mountains, 3 meters high. Perhaps this pass was an important trade route at that time. And Ötzi was a merchant using this route. Or maybe it was an escape route and Ötzi was fleeing from someone. Interesting things also happened after Ötzi's death. Some of the wounds on his hip are due to animal attacks. So after he died, his body remained on the surface for a while and was dismembered by wild animals. Then snow and ice covered him, preserving him for 5,300 years and bringing him to us today. We will never find the perpetrator of this murder, of course. But Ötzi's death shows us how complex and dangerous life could be at the end of the Stone Age. People traded, conflicted, and perhaps even killed each other for valuable possessions, just as they do today. But perhaps the most striking discovery came with the analysis of Ötzi's DNA. When his genetic code was deciphered, much was learned not only about his physical characteristics, but also about his health. For example, he had Lyme disease. We see the oldest known case of this disease. He was prone to heart disease and he had blood type O. Very surprising information emerged. Everyone thought Ötzi was Italian or Austrian, but he wasn't. Perhaps Eastern European or North African? All were wrong. DNA analysis in 2012 revealed that Ötzi's closest relatives lived on the islands known today as Sardinia and Corsica. However, a new DNA analysis performed in recent years was a surprise for us too. It turns out that Ötzi was descended from Anatolian farmers. How was this possible? Well, scientists also found the reason. During Ötzi's lifetime, Europe was undergoing a major transformation. The first modern humans who came to Europe 45,000 years ago were hunter-gatherers. But about 7,000 years ago, everything began to change. People learned to farm, and this new way of life spread rapidly. By 5,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherer culture had almost completely disappeared. According to DNA analysis, Ötzi was descended from the first farmers who migrated to Europe from the lands where our country is located today. These farmers gradually spread throughout Europe. However, in the last 5,000 years, new waves of migration came to Europe, and the genetic structure changed. Today, when people visit Ötzi in the museum and look at him through the glass, they are actually looking at themselves, because Ötzi shows us the unchanging aspects of humanity. He, like us, suffered pains, sought treatment. He, like us, journeyed, encountered dangers, and unfortunately, he also became a victim of violence. Ötzi's story continues. Every new technology, every new examination method reveals new information about him. It's like a time capsule bringing us messages from 5,300 years ago. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that humanity has a much older and more advanced body of knowledge than we thought. If you like the video, you can press the like button and subscribe. As always, until we meet again, thank you for being here. Best regards.